Working Cows Podcast, Episode 51.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Conry, the host of the Working Cows Podcast. We have Johann Zietsman on with us today, talking about cell grazing development in arid lands. Was suggested by a member of the Working Cows Mob Facebook group, which you can gain access to at workingcows.net/support or patreon.com/workingcows, place where you've got opportunity to give suggestions for questions for upcoming guests. So we're going to start off today talking with Johann about cell grazing development in arid lands. Johann is the author of the book Man, Cattle, and Veld, as well as an experienced grazer and consultant around the world. Originally made the connection with him through Daniel Suarez. I appreciate that connection. So, Johann, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
It's my pleasure, Clay.
So you have been exposed to ranching all around the world. I know that you had done some work with Daniel Suarez, who put us in touch, and he's in a bit more tropical climate, which is similar to the climate that you were familiar with in Africa, but you've been also working in other different climates. So how does the strategy differ from arid land to more tropical climates?
Well, the first challenge we have in arid lands is that you basically have in many areas that are degraded bare soil or very low stocking rates. And the only way to kickstart the ecosystem is to go have a very high animal impact to get the grasses established and the water cycle and mineral cycles working. So in that sense, we have to be very creative in how we do that. But without going over that certain threshold in terms of impact, nothing much will change. So we have to be creative, and one of the ways to do that is to start by putting out bales of hay, or in some areas people create a portable feedlot to get the impact. And once you have that impact, the positive results will stay there for a long period of time. And that allows us then to start grazing at higher stock densities and growing more grass.
Sure. So these people are coming in. What kind of infrastructure are they using to essentially create a feedlot on these arid lands and these degraded soils?
Well, basically, we use electric fencing as the infrastructure. And in terms of portable feedlot, you just need to have a portable fence that you move around all the time and move your feed troughs around and create that impact on those bare areas.
And how long are they staying on those bare areas generally in these situations?
I would suggest that people move several times a day to cover a larger area in terms of impact, and that would work very well.
And what kind of stocking rates are you thinking about in these areas?
Stocking rates or stock densities? There's a difference. Are you stock density?
Yes, sir.
Well, with the impact, it's just the highest density you can get. Basically, the density you would have in a corral. You can create that with a portable feedlot, or you could put out bales of hay and concentrate the animals in there. So it will be in the region of hundreds to 2,000 animals per hectare in terms of stock density.
Wow. And the water seems to be a challenge in these situations. Are they hauling water to these cattle?
I think some people would do that. I would prefer to have a permanent water point where I would control the movement of the cattle between the areas they're impacting and the water by having a corridor. For me, that's more practical.
And would they have free choice to leave the paddock to go back to the water through the corridor, or is that something you would limit?
No, I would give them free access, just control with a corridor, And the other thing is one can move that corridor around, so you can create greater impact by doing that as well.
And the corridor, what is that going to look like?
Well, depending on how long they walk up and down, that's why I say you could use that as it's a corridor that'll be a few meters wide, so it would be trampled a lot, but that would be good impact if you use that corridor for a few days and then move on to another corridor next door, back and forth to water.
And how much time will it take to kind of reboot the soil health on these arid lands? How many times are you going to have to go back? Is it year after year? Is it one time and you get that kick started, or what does that process look like?
Well, for me, I think what's very important is that we have to realize that the threshold in terms of impact before things will change, and that's a very high threshold. So very, very high impact, and that's why we use these feedlots or put out bales of hay. But once you've created that impact, the positive results of that will remain for very long, several years, I would imagine. And then within that period of time, you only need stock density to control what I would call the non-selectivity of grazing.
The non-selectivity of grazing is in cattle who are
yes,
selecting for plants they prefer rather than...
No, that's right, yes. So I believe non-selective grazing is extremely important in terms of changing or having a positive effect on the species composition of the grasses and forbs that are available to animals to eat. So the density would have to be high enough to limit to selectivity to a situation where we have total non-selective grazing.
Can you give me some examples of different areas in the world where you've seen this work and kind of their resource base as far as moisture and what they were dealing with when they got to the place and how it changed after they left?
Well, I was involved in places in South Africa where once we created that impact, that positive results in terms of grass, we created a situation where we moved from basically bushes and shrubs to virtually 90% grass. Now that, because of the impact, remained there for several years, and we just had to create a situation where we grazed non-selectively, and that would be a process that would carry on forever. So every now and again, you might have to increase the stock density to create impact, but generally speaking, once you've created that high impact, then relatively high stock densities that allow non-selectivity of grazing would probably be sufficient in terms of impact to the soil.
And what about the hay bales you mentioned? Is there a season where that's more beneficial than? Is there one season where that's more beneficial than another?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say at any time you could use it during the wet season, the growing season, or the dry season. But that impact is essential to get the whole process kick-started.
What has been some of your work that you've been doing on this trip? Where have you been so far, and where are you headed next?
Well, I spent 2 weeks in Mexico. I did some seminars in Mexico, and I'm also involved in a ranch there where I advise them at least once or twice a year in terms of non-selective grazing. And I've also been just recently and a couple of days ago in Gainesville. At the moment, I'm in Hennessy in Oklahoma, and then I'll be moving to Veneta for a seminar, and then from there we're going to Fredericksburg in Texas, and from there somewhere in Colorado, and then back home.
And what keeps you busy when you're back home?
Well, I'm in the fortunate situation now that I have the opportunity to start again. That's why I'm starting in Zambia, to start a new operation, to build up a ranch. And we intend to build up a model ranch where we apply sustainable grazing and breeding practices, as well as agriculture, because Zambia has a climate amenable to cropping. So we'd like to build up a model property, model ranch, we'd like to call it, and use that as a training center for people from all over the world to come and look how we do it.
Can you give me a definition of what you mean by climate amenable to cropping?
Well, we get between 40 and 50 inches of rain over a 4-month period. So that allows cropping to be carried out, growing of crops. The problem is that what happens in that part of Central Africa is you have forest that's taken out, and if you're going to cropland, somehow you have to mimic nature to be sustainable. Otherwise, the soil fertility declines very quickly.
So what happens when the forest is taken out? You're not able to mimic nature, is what you're saying?
I'm saying that's what happens conventionally. So the soil fertility declines very rapidly. So what we have to do, we have to mimic nature. Somehow we have to incorporate trees into our croplands as well as pastures and rotate that. That's the only way we can do a sustainable system of cropping there.
I know a lot of places in the world that do a lot of cropping with a lot less annual rainfall than 40 to 50 inches. Is that something that you would encourage people to shy away from, or is there a strategy that it can be used in those situations?
No, I would say wherever you can do cropping, if it's feasible, we still have to mimic nature somehow. And the only way we can do that in certain areas is to do alley cropping with trees, legumes, pastures, and we somehow have to bring the animal element back, either with cover crops or longer term pastures in rotation with crops.
You said that you are hoping that this would be a model ranch. What's the state of the ground that you're looking at using at this moment?
Well, at the moment it's forest. You have to clear part of it out and put in pastures, and part of it would be we'd have to do cropping and simulate a situation where we can mimic nature for people to follow as an example. So there's a lot to learn, but there are a lot of people I've been I'm in contact with that'll be able to help us to how to do that.
Is this going to be your first work in Zambia, or have you been working in Zambia for quite a while?
I've advised people, but this would be my first project in Zambia.
Are you going to use, I imagine you're going to leave some of the trees. Are you going to use the trees, graze through the trees and some silvopasture and some things like that?
Well, certain areas, what I would like to do is leave it intact as it is in strips. Other areas we have to open up, otherwise you won't be able to grow much grass because of the trees, too much shading. And other areas we'll go into cropland, probably clear most of the forest, the trees, and then plant certain varieties of trees in rows so that you can still use your mechanical implements to prepare the croplands.
What do you foresee as some of the challenges with this piece of property that you are looking to start working on?
Well, we know what to do. It's just how we're going to mimic nature. So it's going to be a challenge for us, and it's going to be very different to what everyone else is doing. But I'm looking forward to it, and basically the principles involved I'm quite familiar with in my head what we have to do. So we'll still have to work with other people to help us find the right combinations of crops and trees.
Those principles have worked everywhere they've been tried, haven't they?
Absolutely. I mean, in other parts of the tropical world and parts of South America, they're already doing silver pasture and alley cropping.
And how have you learned from people already? Have you been on places where you've seen those things being done and had an opportunity to gather some information there?
No, I haven't been, but I've been on the internet, and I've read articles, so I know quite a bit what's happening. And we have a unique situation as well in that part of the world in Central Africa, where we have a certain tree that would fit very well into such a system, because during the growing season, our wet season, the tree loses all its leaf because it goes in floodplains, where it floods during the growing season. So that would be a very good combination with crops, where you have a situation where the trees lose their leaf, and there's a lot of sunlight for the crops in between.
What kind of crops do you anticipate using on this piece of property?
Well, basically, what the commercial cropping in Zambia is mainly maize, corn, soyas, and winter wheat, irrigated winter wheat.
And you talked about following that up with a cover crop. Would that be the winter wheat or something else?
Well, the cover crop would definitely be an option, and a lot of commercial people are already starting to do cover crops. So it would definitely be one of the things we would do, yes.
Can you talk about traditional agriculture in Africa? Is there such a thing as traditional agriculture there? Has it followed a lot of the same practices that American agriculture has, or has it been shaped by the work of other people?
Well, the traditional agriculture in Africa, basically, when it comes to cropping, has been, in the past, when the population was a lot lower, was basically shifting agriculture where forests are taken down, trees are burnt, a crop is grown for a year or two, and then people move on. But the problem now with the higher population is that people have become static. So we have to follow a more sustainable way of doing it. From the commercial point of view, most crop farmers, most livestock owners follow the American model, which is unfortunately not the one that's sustainable.
And what are the major differences between what you're hoping to do and the American model?
Well, the American model basically is based on the feedlot system, particularly with cattle breeding. So the problem is that you breed cattle that adapt to the feedlot and not to natural grazing. So we have to change that. And the other one is we have to use the cattle to improve the land. You know, we've talked about high animal impact and non-selective grazing. So that is definitely what we would have to do.
What are the consequences of raising cattle that are adapted to the feedlot?
Well, the consequence is that they require better nutrition and higher inputs, so they're far more expensive. And they are more amenable to a situation where you have light stocking with selective grazing to get enough production on them. The big problem, the big paradigm change ranchers have to make is to change their goal from production per animal to production or profit per hectare. And that is where the difference comes in terms of the genetics you require for high production per animal and high profit per hectare, totally different.
I was watching a video of you speaking at a National Grazing Land Conference, and you were talking about these animals that are adapted to be profitable. Can you talk about some of the physiological differences or the genotypical differences in these animals that are profitable on their own without inputs or with less inputs?
Well, basically what it amounts to is an animal to be an efficient grass converter. There are certain attributes that they require, and one is that they require a much smaller frame, because a smaller frame allows a higher relative intake, and that relates to better body condition, and that in the end results in far higher fertility. And that is one of the attributes, is a requirement rather, is a smaller frame together with climatic adaptation, parasite disease resistance, and individual high appetite. And that is the opposite of what we select for, because when you're selecting for production per animal, you automatically breeding animals that are larger frame, and that's contrary to what we require.
This is the same. This is the same in all different environments, right? This smaller frame size animal being a more efficient grass converter, whether you're tropical or arid or whatever environment you're in. It seems to be a similar animal that is an efficient grass converter. Is that right? Absolutely correct.
And that is 100% correct. The only difference is that in certain environments where you have better quality grazing, which I call high octane grasses, you can still run larger frame animals that are still relatively productive in terms of the body condition and fertility. But under more adverse conditions of nutrition, only the smaller frame animals will be able to produce at maximum. But under all conditions, your smaller frame animals will always be more productive and more efficient. But when we talk about smaller frame, we're not necessarily talking about much lighter animals. So the smaller frame allows them to have a larger intake, and that results in an animal that for its frame is much heavier. So the differential between frame, between different environments, and body size, body weight, the differential is much greater in terms of frame than it is in weight.
I think that sometimes a misconception that we get in our head is that if we only had more moisture, especially coming from western South Dakota where we get 14 inches of rain per year, if we only had more moisture, we'd be able to get by on less days of feed and less inputs. Do people in higher moisture climates, maybe with a lower octane grass, do they still end up spending more than necessary on inputs and supplements because of the mismatch of the animal to the environment? Is that what you've seen?
That's absolutely correct, and I see it all over the world. I'm shocked to see, particularly in the Americas, North America, and Latin America, the poor adaptation of animals in terms of particularly nutrition, and that is because of the result of selecting for so-called feedlot efficient animals, or selecting for absolute weight gain, which results in larger frame. And another thing that strikes me, particularly in the United States, is because of the difference between winter and summer temperatures. That most of your cattle aren't adapted to summer temperatures, and that doesn't allow them to put in enough body condition. So that's one of the constraints you have. If animals can't put on body condition in summer, they're going to need much more inputs in terms of feed and hay to carry them through the cold winters.
Is there a different breed that could be successful in North America, do you think, or some different selection that could take place within the breeds that we are using that would make them more able to put on condition in the summer?
Well, in terms of selection, yes, definitely. We can change breeds to a certain degree. We'd have to select for maturity rate rather than the growth rate, for instance. And we'd have to select for fertility. We'd have to use genetically discerning selection criteria for fertility, which there are. And the other thing is we also have an opportunity to breed better composites. And in particular, I would suggest we use some of the African breeds to do that. And one of the breeds that comes to mind that combines very well with your Angus, which is a popular breed here in America, would be your Mashona, because it complements so much and adds to summer adaptation and better body condition.
Yeah, and it's not just the southern United States that has issue with heat stress. I mean, we don't have as many days of heat stress here, but it's not uncommon for us to see over 100 degrees in South Dakota more than one time during the summer, and in the 90s regularly throughout the summer. So is that something that you think would be a benefit to even northern North American producers to bring in some of these African breeds?
Absolutely. I would say a quarter of good African, selected African breed blood would make a big difference. As I travel around the world, the most heat-stressed cattle I've seen are here in the United States, the Midwest, and the southern parts of the United States during the summers. In the tropics, we don't have it because the cattle there are adapted to heat. But here you have that problem.
Do you know anybody in the Midwest or in northern North America that has taken that route, or do you have any examples of that?
Yes, in particular, one person I visited today at Tennessee and Oklahoma, John Haymaker. I've been involved with him for the last 4 years, and I just visited his herd today, and I was extremely impressed with what I saw in terms of the composite he's breeding, which combines basically Mashona with the Angus, an early maturing type Angus. And for me, that's the ultimate what one requires here, because the animals look very similar to Angus, but they're much smoother coated during the summer, and they have much better body condition.
What is the advantage of an early maturing animal?
Well, the advantage of an early maturing animal basically is that you they will have better body condition under all situations because of early maturity. That's a definition of early maturity. And that will reflect, the better body condition will reflect in a higher conception rate and much easier yearling conception, better yearling conceptions.
Well, Johann, I really appreciate your time today. It's been a really great conversation, and I thank you so much for being willing to take some time during your busy schedule. How can people keep up with you and see what you're up to and where you're going to be and different things like that?
Well, I'm not very technologically minded, Greg, so I don't have a current website at the moment. I do have an email address they can contact me with if they would like more information. I can give it to you if you would like it.
I could be a person that can put people in contact with you if you don't feel comfortable sharing your email address with everybody.
That's 100% correct. And I also I have a WhatsApp group that I work with a lot of people from all over the world, and if there are people really interested, I could put them on that, and we can share our knowledge on that group as well.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I will make sure that people are aware of how they could get a hold of you. If they get in touch with me, I can facilitate that. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Some really good stuff there with Johann. I really appreciate him taking the time to join me today on the Working Cows podcast. If you feel like you missed anything in there, obviously you can go back and listen to the whole thing again. Never anything taken down or anything like that. There's always a place to go and grab every episode. WorkingCows.net/episodes has all the episodes on one page. Also, consider following me on Twitter at YP Clay Conry, as in Youth Pastor Clay Conry, YP Clay Conry. Or check us out at facebook.com/workingcows. I try to grab some significant nuggets there and put them up every week for people to hear them again and discuss them and make them very shareable. They can retweet or share them on Facebook and just get them out to as many people as possible. So come back next week for episode 52 of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you soon.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.